Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dead Times, the only horror movie podcast recorded in a bunker underneath a farmhouse. I'm your host, Peter, and with me, as always, is the guy dressed in a shower curtain, Tim. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me.
And today we're going to talk about 10 Cloverfield Lane, the sequel-ish sequel to Cloverfield.
Question mark?
Yeah, the not exactly sequel to Cloverfield.
I mean, it's a sequel. It just isn't really a follow-up.
See, the thing is that 10 Cloverfield Lane is more thematically a sequel to Cloverfield than it is an actual, here are the same characters and here's the extension of the storyline.
Yeah, it is set in the same universe as the other movie and takes place after the other movie, which makes it technically a sequel, but those facts don't impact the movie at all for the vast majority of the running time. So it is not a traditional sequel.
Honestly, the events of the first movie have no impact on this movie. You say that it takes place in the same universe, but like at no point are we ever even informed that it takes place in the same universe.
Not really, but it could.
It definitely could, and there are amazing YouTube videos attempting to connect this particular movie to the rest of the franchise. But there isn't anything that's like the Cloverfield monster never shows up. No one references any attacks on New York. It's all just, again, it's mostly thematic connection.
Yeah, this movie, the ending only isn't bullshit if you've seen the other movie. I think that if you're going into this knowing that this is an entry in a franchise in which there definitely are weird alien monsters and shit, if you didn't know that, then I imagine the ending to this movie wouldn't play so well. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, well, I love this movie, and
it's an awesome movie.
It is really, really good. Remember how I said that this movie had all the had all the characterization that got left out of the first one? Yeah, it absolutely does.
Absolutely. Yeah, so much so that it almost seems like they heard that criticism of the first movie and so went out of their way to make something as character driven and as little action driven as possible.
Yeah, it is an extraordinary. I love this movie, and this movie does everything that you're not supposed to do in this type of movie, or really movies in general.
Basically, yeah.
This movie has a 4-act structure instead of a 3-act structure.
Yeah, and the fourth act is like 5 minutes long.
But it's so good. The acting is phenomenal. The characters are so well drawn, and you never know where this movie is going, even though where it actually goes, there's no other option than for it to go to that place.
Essentially, yeah. This is one of the more unpredictable movies I've seen in recent memory. Yeah, just because it never telegraphs to you what exactly it's playing at. And it's not even entirely clear what that is once the movie ends. It's not really clear what this whole franchise's game is.
Yeah, and like I said, this movie is way more thematically connected to the first movie than in any, like, the only real actual in-movie connection it has to the original Cloverfield is the fact that it takes place in a place that's also called Cloverfield.
Basically.
But in its own way, I think this movie is as much about 9/11 as the first movie was. It's just more subtle.
Yeah, definitely. Or at least, about the figurative fallout from 9/11.
Whereas the point of the first movie was to recapture the feeling of that day in New York City, which is why, obviously, it was set in New York. 10 Cloverfield Lane is more about what came after that, where...
Yeah, how people responded to it.
Which
the rather poor way in which many responded to it.
Which was to literally lock the world out.
Yeah, not try and understand what happened, really. Not try and understand the forces that made it happen. Not try to learn anything more about it or take any reasonable measures to make things right. Just to immediately go on full defensive mode.
Also to be willing to live in an incredibly toxic society that is just getting worse and worse and worse because of the fact that it is superior to being outside in the big scary world.
Yeah, pretty much. Freedom fries.
But so it has its own unique sort of take on the same ideas that Cloverfield, the original, was playing with. Yeah, and I think that they are very well suited to be watched together, even if, again, they are incredibly different movies. Stylistically, they are night and day. Like, again, the first movie is a found footage movie. This one is definitely not a found footage movie.
Yeah, not at all. And again, it actually seems like they sort of go out of their way to make it as not found footagey as they can. Like, I was watching it, I was like, and like my thoughts watching were like, wow, these characters are all really well developed. The cinematography is really good. The score is really, really good. And these, again, none of these things are things that you get in found footage movies. So it seemed like, what I would guess, because I know this came out a long while after first movie, almost 10 years, right? And I would guess why it took part of artistically speaking why it took so long is because the guys who made the first movie didn't want to make another found footage movie, that they didn't see any further possibilities with what they were doing in that direction, and so then this movie is the product of when they decided, fuck it, let's just not make a found footage movie. Yeah, and I think it's all the better for that, and it seems like they were really excited about that, making this movie.
I am reasonably certain that this wasn't intended to have kind of anything to do with the original Cloverfield, and then they just realized that it was dealing with the same sort of topics and the same sort of ideas as that original Cloverfield movie, and so they just were like, well, with a few minor tweaks here, which essentially just is naming the street that they're on as...
yeah, with one shot of a mailbox.
And then, as I said before, there are very mind-boggling YouTube videos that explain just weird little background details that show up in 10 Cloverfield Lane that are tied to weird little background details that showed up in Cloverfield. Like, if you really want to spend 20 minutes on, like, a corporation name, or, like, this is the name on an envelope that is shown in the bunker, or this gas station has a neon sign advertising this product, which has this tie to the original movie, you can.
Right.
And, like, it is kind of interesting, but it isn't particularly deep, would be, I guess, the best word for it, because, again, all that stuff that they're building off of are promotional things. The original Cloverfield had a sort of interesting promotional campaign, which was that they didn't really tell you anything about the movie, and all the stuff that you learned was through, like, fake websites that were advertising companies that took place in the Cloverfield universe, and, like, fake news articles. And so if you put all of that together, you could come up with sort of a hint of kind of a backstory of what was going on. Same thing, they have the same advertising campaign for 10 Cloverfield Lane, but again, it's not designed to, like, really give you an informative look at what this movie is. It's instead supposed to get you excited about this great puzzle box, essentially, that leads up to this movie.
Yeah, this is all the stuff that we used to call Easter eggs before everyone decided that was the main reason to consume media, was to look for microscopic connections to other media and be excited about them.
But I think that all that's pretty unnecessary, and all that's pretty unnecessary, and it's just that it's more important that these two movies have this sort of deep thematic resonance with each other over what America is after 9/11 and dealing with fallout from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the perspective that it offers on that is really unique and really interesting.
Yeah. So do you have any other initial thoughts about 10 Cloverfield Lane?
I think I've kind of said all the ones that I've got while we were talking. And again, it's an awesome movie.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
It's really good. And yeah, we'll get into it when we get to the end. But there is, again, I think the end, because, like, watching it as I did, the end is kind of amazing. But I really do think that if this weren't an entry in the Cloverfield franchise, I don't think the ending would play as well as it did. That it would, again, if you weren't predisposed to the idea that, okay, this guy might be crazy, but there is definitely weird shit that exists in this universe. If you weren't predisposed to that, then I feel like then the ending would feel like it sort of betrayed the movie a little bit. But we'll get into that in a little bit. As it stands, I think it's a really wonderful movie.
Yeah, I mean, I said in the last podcast, I believe, that I thought this movie was better than the original, and I absolutely 100% stand by that.
No contest. And I like the original again a lot more than some people do. But
yeah, I mean,
this is no contest a better movie.
We were very positive about the original movie, and this is just a huge step up from it.
Yeah, and having not seen the third one yet, I can only imagine that it continues to improve.
I mean, this franchise has an upward trajectory that reaches the space.
I'm really, really excited to watch that movie.
Yeah. But our main character is Michelle, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead. And Michelle is just fantastic. Like,
a remarkably resourceful young woman.
No, Michelle's main character trait is that she is fucking brilliant. That Michelle is sitting there always analyzing every angle of every single thing that's going on around her and figuring out how she can turn it to her advantage.
Yeah, she makes, like, a plan of escape that would have been saved for the third act in most movies set up like this, after the characters become sort of weathered and worldly wise. She makes a plan of that caliber in, like, the first 10 minutes of the movie.
She is pretty comparable to Erin from You're Next.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and this is in sort of a weird way kind of a similar movie to Your Next. Although again, I like this a lot better, which I guess sort of comes down to the fact that the threats that she's up against are legitimate and are legitimately scary. You know, John Goodman is terrifying in this movie. Then there's all the shit in the ending, and that I think was the main thing that bothered me about Your Next, which I didn't really articulate all that well in our episode about it, is that by demystifying entirely its bad guys, you know, just making them all a bunch of schmucks, it felt too easy for our badass main character, who was the best part of this movie, to, you know, just kind of mow them down. You know, whereas here it feels like the world is legitimately against our main character, and so you get to cheer without feeling like this is all too easy, you know, when she so brilliantly is able to be triumphant.
Yeah, well, part of what makes this movie work is the fact that Michelle is constantly unsure of the world that she's in, like the legitimate world that she's in.
Yeah. Which makes her an audience surrogate in that regard.
If she knew exactly what was going on at any point in the movie, you would know that she would have a handle on her situation. But it's just the fact that she legitimately doesn't know. She doesn't know what's going on outside the bunker. She doesn't know what's going on inside the bunker. And she can't accurately make, like, the judgment about what her next step should be.
Yeah, which again is kind of, I think, the only way that you could anchor this movie as the start to the Cloverfield franchise being a franchise, you know, because it was so shrouded in mystery, and there was no, you know, everybody would have had so little idea of what was going on and of what the deal with this movie is. And so I think the only way that you could really anchor that movie is with a character who is just as in the dark as the audience.
Yeah. How do you think Michelle compares to Sydney and Gale from Scream?
I didn't, that wasn't a parallel that I really drew watching the movie. Maybe just because Scream is such a different animal from this franchise, you know, whereas Your Next, which obviously takes some influence from Scream, but has more of a similar kind of subtle deconstructionist, well, not subtle in that case, but a similar sense of deconstruction to this franchise, whereas Scream is deconstructive in a very different vein. But yeah, I mean, you know, as we've pointed out, kind of all modern, really, really resourceful and really interesting final girls do sort of date back to Sydney.
Yeah, I would say that Michelle is more of a cousin to the ladies from Scream than she is a direct descendant. That the idea of what a heroine in a horror movie should be the ideas of Scream have become so permeated in the genre that a character like Michelle that's in a movie that's not an homage to Scream at all, not directly influenced by it, still comes off as sort of very taking some of the best elements of those characters.
Yeah, and it's like when bands name the Beatles as an influence. You know, it's like, well, no shit. You know, if the Beatles didn't happen, you wouldn't be making music. And if Sydney hadn't been written as a character, then we probably wouldn't still be writing movies with final girls in them, because that character just so revitalized that archetype.
Yeah, but Michelle has just broken up with her boyfriend
without telling him,
and she's driving down the road outside of, well, she's leaving New Orleans and she's driving through rural Louisiana. She gets into an argument with her boyfriend over her phone, and she hears some news reports about blackouts in major cities, and then she gets hit by a car. And when she wakes up, she finds herself in a room with cinder block walls on, like, just this little dinky mattress on the floor, and her leg has been cuffed to a pipe. A man named Howard enters the room and informs her that he's going to keep her alive, and is just generally pretty creepy and terrifying.
Yeah, setting a standard for the rest of the movie.
Which Michelle's an amazing character. There's so many facets to her, but Howard is just wow.
Howard is one of the best movie villains I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, Howard manages to be everything you could possibly want. He's funny, he's off-putting, he's weird, and you kind of want to root for him.
In parts of it, yeah, that's something that this movie does really well, is it really does fuck with your view of him. Just something that you sort of expect the movie to do going into this situation. You know, that the standard, it does sort of follow the standard beats for this sort of story. That's like, you know, at first he seems crazy, and then, you know, he starts to seem more approachable. You get to kind of trust him a little bit, and then it turns out, no, you were right, at first he is bad. You know, and that is what this movie does, but it really, again, it's another bonus of having the reality in this world be so unknown to the audience that you really don't know how crazy he is. And the way that it turns out he actually is right about a lot of things. He was right that there was some kind of apocalyptic event, and he's right that it's dangerous outside. He just happens to also be crazy, which does give you a real sense of uncertainty rather than, just think, okay, this is the part of the movie where it seems like he might not be a threat. And it also sort of goes around that by continually making him look creepy all throughout that. So then you start to wonder, okay, this set up, and are we supposed to be still iffy about him? And then the twist is going to be that he is all right. It really fucks with your sense of expectations all throughout.
Yeah, you are constantly asking yourself, am I misjudging this person?
Yeah, no, even though what you think about him changes, that you will think different things about him, and while you're thinking each of those things, be uncertain about him.
And he is such a brilliantly rendered. All the characters in this movie are so brilliantly rendered, but he is exquisite in how well he is written and performed by John Goodman. Because again, he's clearly someone that is not, I don't know how to properly put it.
He's not okay.
Yeah, he's not okay in the head, but you do not know if if he's just suffering from grief, or if he's legitimately a dangerous person.
Yeah, or if it's between those, if he has sort of a lower level mental disorder. You don't know if he's, if he has autism or something. It's just his demeanor is kind of off, but you don't know whether to judge him for that.
And he can be legitimately scary, but he also can be kind and generous, and again, is completely right about pretty much everything he tells her.
Yeah, just about. It might have been Martians. That was the craziest thing that he said in the whole movie, was there at the beginning, where he's saying, the Russians are working on some pretty bad stuff, and God help us if the Martians ever figure out how to get here. And we're supposed to laugh at them, oh, what a crazy conspiracy theory nut. But who the fuck knows? Given the end of this movie, they might have been from Mars. Makes just as much goddamn sense as anything else in the movie, in this franchise.
But he tells Michelle that there was an attack. They don't know who killed or who attacked. They don't know who attacked the United States, but that the air outside is toxic, and that the only reason why she's alive is because he found her in the car wreck and took her to the bunker that they are currently occupying. And he leaves her key to uncuff her leg, and basically tells her that, we're going to be in this bunker for a year or two. And Michelle, being the amazing, resourceful individual that she is, then comes up with a plan to escape, because she obviously thinks that this person has kidnapped her and is likely going to try and kill her. So she whittles her little crutch into a shiv and then sets fire to a piece of cloth near the fire alarm, and when he comes rushing in, she basically tries to stab him and make her escape. He manages to disarm her, gives her some food, all this while he's been yelling at someone who's off screen, and she hears some violent crashing, but he eventually lets her out, and we get to meet our third character, who is Emmett, who is just a guy, kind of.
Yeah, basically, and he's willing to cop to that. That's kind of the pathos of his character, is that he is somebody who has struggled his whole life with the fact that he's kind of just a guy.
Yeah.
He's just this guy, That was an obscure reference.
Yeah, he's played by John Gallagher Jr., who is a Tony Award-winning Broadway actor.
I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very much not just a guy.
He also starred in The Newsroom on HBO. Yeah, he is legitimately a huge star in musicals and stuff in New York City.
Cool.
But here, he is just sort of this down-home Southern guy who he tells Michelle that, yes, everything Howard said to her was 100% true. So what did you think about Emmett?
I think Emmett's a really necessary part of the movie, because it's weird how not claustrophobic this movie feels in a way, in a good way, because its setting is really, really limited, which again is part of the point. But it doesn't become unpleasant.
This movie had a budget of only $15 million, so that's really low for an alien invasion movie.
Yeah, for a blockbuster. But yeah, and I think that's due to Emmett. That Emmett lends things an air of semi-normalcy, which again sort of masks how unhealthy this all actually is.
The only reason why Emmett is in the bunker is because of the fact that he forced his way in just as Howard was closing it. And he seemingly knocked over a shelf on top of himself because his arm is injured throughout the entire movie. So he can only use the one arm, which when the movie opens, Michelle has this leg injury that sort of fades away over the course of the movie. And yet Emmett still has this arm injury, which makes it so that he is basically physically weaker than she is. And I mean, part of that is because of the fact that he is supposed to be physically weaker than Howard, but it makes for a very interesting contrast that they have this sort of young, healthy guy who is the weakest character out of all of them.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I didn't really think about that, but that does give their kind of three-way dynamic a really kind of unique tinge.
I mean, the main threat of the movie is that Howard has a gun on him, but even if he didn't have a gun, it would be difficult to imagine that Emmett would be capable of overpowering him.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, which I can't off the top of my head think of a movie in which John Goodman was the most imposing character.
In a lot of things John Goodman does, he is the most imposing presence, but
Yes.
the most physically imposing character is not something like his power is always in his voice and in his sheer presence, as opposed to being someone who could literally probably physically take on the rest of the cast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I think is really cool.
Like, I think that Emmett rounds out a lot of the cast because it isn't just Michelle versus Howard the way that these things normally go. Like, normally in this type of
For
movie,
a while.
yeah, like normally in this type of movie, if there was a third person there, it would be another victim of Howard's that would be found like 2/3 of the way through the movie. But instead, it's just this like guy who says, well, Howard's right.
Yeah, and that really makes the movie work.
And he's kind of bumbling and kind of inarticulate, and
he's not an idiot. He just also isn't a genius.
Yeah, and he's just a goofy guy. Like, he's not someone that thinks anyone should take himself seriously. And so Michelle kind of doesn't take him seriously when he's sitting there talking about how there were these horrible lights in the sky and just bad things in general are happening. The three of them go on a little tour of the bunker, which Michelle has her room, which obviously is completely unfinished except for the mattress. And then Emmett sleeps in the middle of the shelves of food, and Howard has his own room, which is the only room that has a toilet and a shower. And everything is a sort of 50s-esque feel to it.
Yeah, which I think is really important to the point this movie is making.
So they don't have a normal music player, it's a jukebox. And like Howard kind of got homey and crafty with the decor. Even though they're in a bunker, there is like this little window there that has a fake backdrop behind it and window curtains. And like he talks about how the furniture are like family heirlooms. Everything's just very, very homey.
Yeah, which again sort of helps to make this movie not unpleasant to sit through, again, given how limited its setting is, but also at the same time can contribute to being unnerving when the moment calls for it.
If you were told that you were going to spend a year in this bunker, you would feel like there are worse places that you could spend a year.
Yeah, exactly. But then when bad things start to happen in it, it sort of makes it all the more eerie. That knowing more about who this guy is gives it sort of casts a lot of the stuff in the bunker in a different light.
And at the end of the tour, Howard takes Michelle to his quasi airlock where he shows her some mutilated pigs. And he goes, well, this is what's happening to everyone outside of this bunker. The only people left alive are theoretically just Howard, Emmett, and Michelle. And they're going to be down there for at least a year, if not two. So when they revealed the pigs, what were you thinking?
I was still suspicious of Howard, but at that point I was thinking, okay, so he's probably correct about how dangerous it is out there. Again, I sort of was along with our heroes in this regard. I was like, okay, it probably is really bad out there, and he probably is right, but that's no particular reason to trust this particular guy.
Yeah, were you ever mistrustful of Emmett?
I thought that Emmett could prove to be a problem, that if there was trouble that he might end up siding with Howard, but I didn't ever think that Emmett would be particularly malicious, or that there was some kind of conspiracy between him and Howard. Which I think if the movie had gone there, it would have sort of overcrowded it.
I think the movie really works because of the fact that Emmett is just there to be like a nice guy. Howard has some really fucked up views about sex, and I think part of what makes the movie work is the fact that Emmett has literally no ulterior motives towards Michelle. He's just there to be a friend.
That's something that I did expect the movie to do, and I was preparing myself to roll my eyes at it, and it never did.
Yeah, Emmett and Michelle are just two people who are become really good friends, and there's nothing more. And they set up the fact that Howard has these deeply fucked up notions of sex, and it never actually pays off because Emmett and Michelle never actually develop any romantic feelings for each other. Which, and when I say pays off, I mean like in a normal movie, that would have been like the most important plot point. But again, 10 Cloverfield Lane is constantly upsetting our notions of how these narratives go.
Yeah, it's got other stuff on its brain.
So Michelle is constantly hearing what she thinks is a car above their bunker. And, which again, this is still the first night she's hearing this car. And so she clearly thinks that this whole story about there being lights in the sky, an attack, and toxic air is completely bullshit. And so that night, when they're eating dinner, she hatches a plan to steal Howard's keys. And she has one little moment of mild flirtation with Emmett and Howard goes ballistic and confronts her about it, and like obviously gets really, really close to her, and she's able to pocket his keys, and then she smashes a beer bottle in his face and makes her escape, which is, again, this movie at the 20-minute mark, Michelle's come up with already 2 plans for escape that are quite impressive.
Yeah, I loved that sequence while she was holding the keys of Howard messing around with his bottle, and you can just see her watching him do that and just panicking very, very quietly. So he's gonna go for the bottle opener. He's gonna look for the bottle opener. He's gonna figure out what I did. And it's such a good scene because it's so suspenseful.
She manages to leap over the table and climb the stairs and gets to the airlock, and she sees a car drive up to the edge of the bunker, and a woman gets out of it and runs to the airlock and is basically pounding on the glass, and there's something horribly, horribly wrong with this woman.
Yeah.
She keeps screaming about how she's barely been affected by it, barely even touched her, and then when Michelle won't let her in, she bashes her head against the window to the airlock until she's bleeding from it and basically collapses on the ground outside, and Michelle goes back into the bunker. Now, what'd you think about that?
Again, it's just you have so little information that you don't really have any context to put anything that you see in. So again, there was a part of me that was like, okay, maybe there really, still after that scene, I was like, maybe there really is nothing. Maybe, I don't know, this is some kind of, this is just some kind of weird mind game that Howard is playing on these people, and that person was in on it for some reason. There's no particular reason to think that that's implausible. It's, more plausible in some ways than what ends up happening. So Occam's razor really goes out the window watching this movie, just because all explanations are equally unlikely. So it really keeps you in the dark. But yeah, that's a disturbing sequence.
No, it's really disturbing. And like, the movie goes as far out of its way as possible to show you Howard being right without literally going outside this bunker. And again, that's not something that would happen in a normal movie like this. Like, there might be something that would convince Michelle that maybe Howard's right, but at this point, you can pretty much assume that he's right, that maybe he has someone on the outside pulling all this stuff with him, but...
Yeah, but it's very unlikely.
It's much more likely that whatever he thinks happened, probably did happen. And that's the conclusion that Michelle draws, and as we are shown over and over again, Michelle is really, really smart.
Essentially, yeah, but it becomes sort of, for part of this movie, it becomes sort of a moot point, just because so much of the threat in this movie has nothing directly to do with that. So it sort of goes to the back of your mind for a little while about what exactly is going on out there, and it doesn't really resurface until, again, as you said, until the 4th act. Yeah, the way the movie messes with your sense of perspective and your sense of the immediate priorities is really brilliant.
After Michelle goes back to the bunker, we get a long section of the movie that is basically just them living in the bunker together. And like, they just are doing puzzles and watching movies and reading magazines.
Throwing on some good tunes.
Yeah, dancing. And like, again, Howard is significantly less menacing in this section, that once Michelle is convinced that Howard was actually right, she lets her guard down a little bit and is able to start enjoying his company. And like, obviously Emmett is fun, so it is just life in the bunker, and it is a life that seems pretty decent.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that as we go along, I don't know if I would say that it's really the case that Howard in this section of the movie is putting on an act exactly. That he's not, again, as we find, as we've been kind of talking about this whole time, Howard does turn out to be dangerous and does end up being a threat to our main characters, but he's not a puppet master. He's not somebody who was expertly playing a long game to lull them into a false sense of security and appear unthreatening. He kind of seems to, again, aside from some very deliberate and very noticeable direct lies, he seems like for the most part he's trying to present himself sincerely to these people. So it's hard to say that comfortableness in that middle part of the movie is fake exactly. It's just doomed to be short-lived.
Yeah, this might be a controversial opinion, but I do not believe that Howard intends to hurt either Michelle or Emmett. I think it's inevitable that he will hurt them, and he does hurt them. But
I don't think he intends to hurt Emmett, and I don't think that he consciously intends to hurt Michelle, but I think the way in which he ultimately tries to hurt Michelle is the reason that she's there.
Which, I mean, And Michelle, again, showing that she's really, really smart, when she's able to look out a window, is able to look at Howard's truck and recognize it as the truck that hit her car at the very beginning of the movie. Howard has the story that he saw that the attack was coming and was racing to get to his bunker and accidentally sideswiped her car, and he couldn't leave her there, so he took her down into the bunker with him. That comes off as not necessarily the truth.
But he comes off as genuinely sorry. Yeah, we never really do find out for certain if that was what actually happened. It might have been, it might not have been. There's reasonable evidence for both possibilities.
Like I said, and like you said, I don't think he consciously is intending to hurt Michelle. I think it's just something that is inevitably going to rise up from his fractured psyche. Like we'll get into Howard's psyche in a little bit when we get to that point in the movie.
Yeah, because it is kind of the most fascinating thing about the movie.
But Howard keeps talking about his daughter Megan, sort of obliquely. I don't believe he ever even refers to her as his daughter. It's Emmett who tells Michelle that Megan was his daughter, or Michelle references it. But he always talks about how, like, Megan had magazines, and Megan wore this shirt, and Megan loved Paris, and he talks a lot about Megan. And then Emmett fills in that Howard's wife basically took Megan and they went off, abandoning him, and then Howard spent basically the rest of his life focusing on building this bunker.
Yeah, which again is a thing that in real life crazy people do, but in the universe of this movie turns out to have been a pretty solid idea.
Recently there was an article in, I forget which paper it was, but one of those doomsday preppers who had basically built this bunker and fully stocked it. He was like 70 or 80 at this point, and he like had years and years and years worth of food down this bunker, and like he had some neighbors who were Puerto Rican, and when they found out that he had all this food, they talked him into donating it to Puerto Rico after the hurricane.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and like he has donated like this massive amount of food to Puerto Rico, and like all these supplies and like all the stuff that he had just sitting in this bunker, and now he's like, they talk about the Puerto Rican family, he talks about how he's like a member of their family now, and that he stays over at their house, and like his wife had died, and like he was just a guy who was living all alone, similar to the way Howard is. And it's like, there are people that do this, and there are clearly better uses for all this stuff in our world than preparing for the scenario, the fact that nuclear war or plague or whatever is going to happen, and you're going to suddenly need this like completely isolated bunker down underneath the earth.
Yeah. Although I will say, if there are any doomsday preppers in Puerto Rico, I imagine they're sitting rather pretty right around now.
Yeah. Well, traditional
because an actual apocalypse happened there.
Well, traditionally doomsday bunkers are under the ground, and they better have a waterproof doomsday bunker.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that is funny, because I imagine that Howard is not the only doomsday prepper to say something to the effect of, you know, the stupid thing is not building the ark until after the flood comes. But that's not the best metaphor, because I don't think that a lot of doomsday shelters are waterproof. So if there was an actual flood, they would be entirely useless.
Which, I mean, Howard even says that his little airlock is the closest thing he could approximate to an actual airlock. His entire thing is not waterproof. The air is coming from the outside. It's just going through a highly advanced filtration system.
It's never really explained, because as far as crazy projects go, this one is really sophisticated. We know, or again, at least we're told, that Howard was in the Navy at one point, so we understand why he knows how a lot of this stuff works, but we have no idea where he got the money to pull it off. You know, it is apparently what he's been dedicating his entire life to for a long time, but still, it's just some of that stuff is not cheap. You know, especially not cheap to install under your house. So yeah, that's just it's another mystery about this guy that isn't really cleared up.
Which, whatever he did in the Navy involved launching satellites into space. So he had some great degree of technical skill, but where he got all the money to build this incredibly sophisticated bunker is unknown. All we know is that he built it, and Emmett helped him quite a lot, apparently. But yeah, it's just that he dedicated his life to building this incredibly sophisticated bunker, and it wound up being exactly what was needed, at least somewhat, for the situation that he found himself in. But yeah, so when we hit the section where it's just them living in the bunker for a while, how did your feelings change about the characters?
Again, throughout most of the movie, I was kind of on my guard, just because, you know, again, against kind of anything, just because this movie's so unpredictable and I had no idea where it was going, and so I was trying to kind of prepare myself for every possibility. But well, it's here that we start to get some more characterization for Michelle. That Michelle talks. Well, she she and Emmett have that great scene together where they both kind of spill their guts about their lives before this point, and she has that great moment where she says, where she tells the story about seeing a man abusing his daughter in a store once, and that she wanted to step in, but she says, I did what I always did when things get too dire. So, I panicked and ran, which is what she did from her relationship in the beginning of the movie. It's what she did with Howard, or tried to do twice now already. And that's a really, really strong bit of characterization. Yeah, and then the whole backstory that we get about Emmett too, which isn't as defining of a trait as that, but that's a really touching story about him gearing up to leave and then intentionally sabotaging himself just because he's sort of afraid of not measuring up to the world outside of his little corner of rural Louisiana. Yeah, you really do get to feel like, I guess that's how the threat starts to get sort of built up, is because you really feel like you get to know these two characters really, really well, and then all the while Howard just remains this mystery, and so you start to feel more uneasy about him again, even though, again, at this point you are sort of prepared to admit that he's probably right about what's going on. That this is where it starts to become clear. No, there's still something very, very wrong here.
Yeah, but at this point it's not clear that he is unstable in a violent way as opposed to just unstable in like a quirky, odd way. He's the kind of person that you could live with even if it might be unpleasant at times. Like, I always, with a character like this character, I generally try to be as optimistic as possible for them, because I know that, he might just be a guy who is dealing with the grief of the end of his marriage and his daughter leaving him, and
presumably everyone else he knows being dead.
Yeah, and it might just be that he is someone that just needs compassion and understanding.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you want to do as a human being, and that is why it's so hard to see his story go in the direction that it does.
But he showed Michelle a picture of a girl that is supposedly Megan. They refers to as Megan, which will become important in a moment. And then they hear what sounds like a helicopter outside, and then suddenly their air filters go off, and the access route to the air filters is blocked for some reason. So Michelle has to crawl through the air ducts, because again, she's the only person that's small enough to go, and restart the air filtration system, which she does, and it's sort of this nice triumphant moment. But she discovers an earring in the room that the air filtration system is in, and she discovers a ladder, which leads to another window. This one has scratches on it, and it reveals that the scratches say help, and there seems to be blood, that the person literally scratched their nail down to their bleeding finger.
Yeah, which is also a pretty horrific image.
Which she goes and pulls Emmett aside and shows Emmett the picture that had been told her was supposed to be Megan, and it turns out to be a girl who vanished. And they find another picture of the same girl who is down in the bunker with Howard. This girl vanished and no one was able to find her, and they just thought that she'd run away from this like podunk rural Louisiana town. And the girl is wearing the same shirt that Howard had specifically given Michelle to wear.
Yeah, and this is where it starts to get kind of uncomfortable.
So my question to you, at this point in the movie, do you think Howard is a serial killer?
I think the way that the movie is leaning, yes. Again, we don't really get any sort of exposition dump explaining that this is definitely the case, but
yeah, we only know that he killed at least one person. We don't know if he has done this to more young girls.
Yeah, but it was clearly a killing that was done out of a compulsion that he has. So, at the very least, again, and this is also put together with the way he behaves towards the end of the movie, at the very least, I think that he would be a serial killer if he had more opportunity. That it may be that if he had killed Michelle, then he would have been a serial killer who with only a 2-strike streak. But I think the movie is really heavily implying that that's the mindset that he has.
Yeah, I 100% think that his pattern is to kidnap girls that remind him of his daughter, hold them in this bunker until something sets him off that causes him to murder them, and then start the cycle over again. I do not know if this one girl whose picture he has was the first one. We don't know. We just know that it happened to this one particular girl.
Exactly. We don't know how long this has been going on. We don't know how far back like it goes.
And we know that it's sort of setting up Michelle. Like, he is, again, dressing Michelle as his daughter. He's giving Michelle the magazines that his daughter liked. And there's that fascinating scene where I think they're playing Taboo.
Yes, oh my, that scene is so... That's so off-putting. Because again, it's not played as like an explicitly creepy moment. It's just what he says is so unsettling.
It's a book title, and the first word that Emmett has is little, and then he goes and then he tells Howard the clue is, well, it's what Michelle is, and Howard keeps going, like, girl, girl, girl.
Yeah, child. Yeah, and lands on little princess. Never once says woman.
Yeah, it's so creepy and weird.
It's so creepy.
Yeah, like, again, he went off on Michelle for, like, just a moment of vaguely flirtatious interaction with Emmett. Like, he is trying to reduce her to the status of his daughter and desexualize her and, like, turn her into his perfect little girl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, like, because we don't really know the story, what we're told is that Howard's wife and his actual daughter both moved away, and we assume it's because he was getting obsessed with this project. That's what we're told, and that's never confirmed to be untrue. But the possibility does sort of arise in your mind is like he might have killed his daughter. That might have been what he's the life that he has now is just him sort of going through that over and over again. We don't know.
Yeah, and when I said earlier that he didn't intend to hurt Michelle, what I mean is that Howard is not like Hannibal Lecter sitting there plotting to murder people.
No.
He is someone that is inevitably going to murder them. It's just that the way he is interacting with them and the way he thinks of himself in relation to them is not, this person is my victim.
Exactly. And that was roughly the point that I was making earlier.
He eventually was going to murder Michelle. He was probably going to murder Emmett, even if they had stayed in the bunker for a year without discovering these sort of facts about him. I don't think that he could have managed to avoid that.
No, but he might have tried.
Like, in that, I think that is sort of one of the things that makes him such a scary individual. Like, he isn't one of those scream killers that is out there plotting to murder someone. He is a guy who genuinely thinks he's trying to do the right thing, doesn't have any real malicious intent towards these people.
Yeah, again, not consciously.
These characters are so brilliant. They're so multifaceted.
Yeah, and I can't offhand think of. I mean, there are a couple other characters. There's Peter Lorre's character in M is sort of a similar deal. There are a couple other characters like this, mostly not in horror movies. You don't get bad guys like this, and it walks the line so well between having him be sympathetic and having him be terrifying, which is hard to do because usually one of those will undermine the other at some point. Either you will have a bad guy that is portrayed as being too sort of ultimately human and kind of pathetic to be really frightening, or vice versa, that they'll put so much energy into having them be frightening that they just sort of effectively become a monster, which is sort of the Hannibal Lecter model. But this character manages to really effectively be both. Again, even though he is sort of all surface level in the way that he's acting, your fear isn't what his plan might be or anything like that. It's just what he might do, and that he might do anything regardless of what his intentions are, and that's really, really frightening. I think it's brilliant. I think it's probably the best and most unique thing about this movie.
Which, once they realize what Howard really is, again, Michelle, being fucking brilliant, comes up with a way to make their own hazmat suit. They trick Howard into throwing away his shower curtain, which they then pull out of the trash, and Michelle starts making a hazmat suit complete with a gas mask based off of Howard's own survival books, Howard has a delightfully silly shower curtain with like this giant duck on it.
Yeah, it's a giant rubber duck.
I mean, this movie has a really whimsical sense of humor to it. Like, despite all the darkness.
Yeah, which again, I think is spiritually in line with the first movie, although I think this movie integrates its kind of goofy sense of humor much better than the first movie did, which I talked about a lot in our episode about that movie, that I felt like the more comedic aspects of it really stood out like a sore thumb. And again, not even necessarily that they didn't work, because TJ Miller is really funny in that movie, but they didn't really integrate integrate that into the movie as a whole, I think, yeah, a tenth as well as they did here. That again, this movie, especially given the events of the ending, you could sort of view as a really, really dark comedy. I think that's reductive, but it's sort of a valid perspective.
Like, there's a scene where they're doing the cat puzzle and pieces are missing, and they're talking about how the cat is blind in one eye.
Yeah.
It's just like cute little stuff like that.
He's getting ready to go snorkeling. He's not gonna be able to do that.
But Howard discovers that some of his tools are missing and confronts Emmett and Michelle with a giant vat of acid that he has just lying around the bunker.
That he just has. Yeah, which, again, he's probably used before.
Emmett comes up with a story about the fact that he was trying to make a weapon to get Howard's gun. I don't know why this is a story that Emmett went with, but it is. And Howard just stone cold blasts him in the face with the gun, killing him instantly.
That fucked me up, because there's no warning of it. Because, yeah, you feel like he's buying the story. It seems like Emmett's selling it, and and he's being placating, and then Howard just looks at him and says, "I accept your apology." It's just it's out of nowhere, and it's especially this movie has been sort of unsettling in a psychological way all throughout its runtime, but there hasn't been any real explosion of violence that way. Really the only other violence in the movie up to that point were Michelle's 2 escape attempts, and those it was telegraphed pretty early on what was going on. Whereas that just comes out of nowhere, and you're so not prepared for it given the tone of the movie up to that point. It's really effective.
You would become so emotionally invested in Emmett. Like, even if you realize that probably not all 3 of these characters are getting out of the situation alive fairly early on in the movie, like, you just became so invested in Emmett, and like, he's just a fun, nice guy, and then he's just gone, and Michelle is just horrified.
Yeah, and again, you're not prepared for it given the sense of humor that this movie has. It's an act of random and quick violence that's more out of something like The Strangers. You really don't expect it in this movie. You don't expect a character that you've come to like so much, who has been so well defined, to just so immediately meet their demise in that way.
Howard tells Michelle that obviously Emmett was a danger to both of them because he was making a weapon, and Michelle pretty much instantly decides that she's going to put her plan into action and starts basically finishing off her hazmat suit.
There is a really touching scene of her holding Emmett's wallet and looking at the bus ticket that he bought that he still has there. That was a really poignant image.
And then Howard comes into Michelle's room, and they have a tense exchange where Howard notices the hazmat suit. He goes to attack her, and Michelle is able to run around him, and then she shuts the door to her room, knocks the shelves over in front of the door, and runs to his room, where she discovers Emmett's body dissolving in acid. Poor Emmett.
Yeah, poor dude.
And Howard comes barreling out of Michelle's room, and Michelle leaps up and kicks over the acid.
Yeah, which he just then immediately slips and falls into.
Yeah. And she's able to leap from around the various objects in the bunker and is able to go back to her room, grab the hazmat suit, and starts climbing through the vents. And as she's climbing, like, Howard is screaming at her, and takes a knife and starts stabbing at the vents.
Yeah, which is also very frightening, although I don't know how, given that he can hear when she screams, I don't know how he managed to miss her.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the acid had messed him up pretty much by that point.
That's a good point. Yeah, we should mention that he's Two-Face for the last couple minutes of this movie.
Yeah, the acid starts a electrical fire in the bunker. That's all this is going on. And she's finally about to climb up into the room where the air filtration system is, and he manages to grab her leg, but she's basically able to kick his hand off at this point because it's so damaged from the acid.
Essentially, yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, is that it is assumed that due to some combination of his body falling apart because of acid, and his bunker burning down because the acid caught on fire, and various things exploding, it's assumed that somehow Howard dies, but we don't actually see it. We don't know, which of those things actually ended up killing him.
And Michelle is able to make her way to the little window, which is sort of a back door to the bunker, and Howard had this little, like, freezy gas thing that she uses to freeze the lock, and she puts on the hazmat suit, climbs out of the bunker, and is triumphantly free. And of course, she notices birds flying through the air and takes off her gas mask, and that is where a normal movie would end.
But this is not a normal movie.
No, there is an entire fourth act to this. She hears the sound of helicopters, and she looks over, and it's not a helicopter. It is a giant black blob floating in the sky.
It's a giant octopus spaceship
that is undulating. And the fire that the basement has caught on, or that the bunker is caught on, causes an explosion, and the giant undulating spaceship turns towards her, and she starts seeing things moving around in the cornfields around the farmhouse. And these little monster dog things come out and start investigating the area. She hides in
Demogorgons.
She hides in a shed where she discovers the body of the woman who had come to the bunker door earlier.
Oh, that's who that was. I didn't get that at the time. Okay, that makes sense.
That's why the keys to that particular her car was in her pocket.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That follows. Me being an idiot.
She hides out in Howard's car, but then the spaceship comes and suddenly it just unleashes this green gas. It has these unearthly lights on it. It unleashes this green gas, and Michelle's able to quickly put on her gas mask and obviously doesn't die from the green gas, but she does notice that the green gas is highly flammable because the explosion is causing even more explosions when it connects with the gas.
Yeah, and see, again, it turns out that, okay, Howard wasn't right that the entire atmosphere has been poisoned, but he was right that there were poisonous gases that were a problem. That was how the pigs died, presumably.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to that woman. Again, it's sort of a nice even ground, that it's not that it was all lies or all delusions. He just didn't really have the full picture, because reality, it turns out, is even crazier than Howard at this point.
Yeah, which the giant undulating spaceship thing picks up the truck that she's hiding in, and she notices a bottle of alcohol at the bottom of the truck. She makes a Molotov cocktail, and just as it's about to eat her truck, she throws it in its mouth, which causes it to explode, dropping the truck. And
this is a person who adjusts very well to a radical change in the genre of their life. She goes full Tom Cruise pretty quick.
Which she then hops in the other car that belonged to the woman who is outside the bunker door, and she's driving along, and she hears a radio announcement that says that the American government has retaken the southern seaboard, which, remember, they're in Louisiana, and survivors are supposed to go to Baton Rouge. However, anyone with medical or combat experience is supposed to go to Houston to help fight there. And Michelle conveniently comes to a fork in the road that
that literally says...
That literally says Baton Rouge this way, Houston this way.
I hope that sign does exist.
And she turns to Houston, and as she's driving, we find out that the street that Howard's bunker was on was 10 Cloverfield Lane, and a thunderstorm is coming through, and we see more undulating spaceships along the way. End of the movie.
Yeah, it's sort of the ending of Gravity, but with Cthulhu monsters, which are what that movie was missing, let's be honest.
So what did you think about the fourth act of this movie?
I mean, I'm, again, just how I'm wired and what I like in my media, I was pretty much guaranteed to lap it up. I'm not sure that it's actually any good, or the scenes are good, but I'm not sure that it actually makes any sense to structure the movie this way. But, again, I think, this is what I was saying earlier, I think if they hadn't tied this movie in to Cloverfield by titling it the way that they did, if you didn't go into this movie with some sort of preconceived suspicion that there were, well, no, because monsters aren't even brought up in the movie is the thing. Not really. There's that one crack Howard makes about Martians, but what they're talking about, the threat of the outside being, is from like nuclear or chemical warfare fallout. If you didn't see the other movie, you would have no reason to think that, when she gets out, there's going to be alien monsters roaming around everywhere. I think just as a standalone movie, that ending is just batshit and ludicrous and doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But as somebody who watched and enjoyed the first movie, and as somebody who really likes it and wishes that more often movies would radically change in genre a certain way into their runtime, someone who wishes there were more movies like From Dusk Till Dawn, I ate the whole thing up. I thought it was fantastic.
I love this ending. Like I said, this movie breaks every rule of conventional movie making, and I think it is fantastic for it. In any other movie,
because it's different. It's not. Yeah. This is not a movie I've seen before.
Yeah, in any other movie like this, Howard would be a crazy person who is a serial killer, and it would end on Michelle's triumphant freedom and that Howard was wrong and that the world makes sense. Instead, this movie ends with the world makes no sense, and Michelle expresses her character growth by, instead of running from the battle, running to the battle.
Yeah, and that's great. That's the thing, is that that's such a great character payoff, and it feels so awesome, even though there's this ridiculous shit happening all around her. It's very much like Happy Death Day in that regard. That was why I love this another running gag is that we reference Happy Death Day and Heathers and Alfred Hitchcock in every episode. But yeah, Happy Death Day is a ridiculous and kind of stupid movie in some regards, but the character arc at the center of it is so good and so touching that it really gets you on board. And this movie functions exactly the same way. But yeah, like any other movie, at most would have made the knife twist be that it actually is a more regular kind of apocalyptic outside. That yeah, actually there was a war and the majority of people are dead or whatever. That would be as far as most movies would be willing to go to subvert what the movie would normally be. Mm-hmm. And then this movie subverts that subversion by saying, no, it's this totally other thing that you wouldn't have even stopped to consider. So I thought it was awesome.
It is fantastic.
It's a great movie. Like it's honestly might be in, maybe not the top 5 but certainly the upper echelons of the movies that we've covered for this podcast that I hadn't seen already. I think it's an excellent movie.
There's just so much to love about this movie. The performances are amazing, impeccable, fantastic. The writing is sharp and witty and intelligent, and it defies your expectations. It makes you unsettled, and it gives you like a truly magnificent heroine, a magnificent villain, and then a magnificent just normal guy hanging out.
Yeah, a magnificent bastard, if you will. But yeah, and it's supremely disturbing while still being really fun to watch, which is a neat trick if you can pull it off. Yeah, it's just pretty much everything about that. I can't really offhand think of a problem that I had with this movie. I don't know, maybe if I went back I could find some nitpicks, but again, because I was so unsure as to what this movie was doing, what its goal was, and what its sort of end vision was going to be, that at the time watching it, nothing that it did could I say, okay, well, that didn't really work, because I didn't know what the movie was working towards. So, which again is another benefit of, I don't know, just originality, just not being a cookie cutter movie, is that you have more freedom to kind of do whatever you're feeling, and it won't be a slight against whatever genre you're working within. So yeah, offhand, I can't think of anything to complain about in this movie.
Yeah, one of the things that I love is the fact that in the end we find out that apparently the humans are winning, and winning pretty handily. I mean, these aliens have won,
or at least that they're holding their ground. That we're not, this isn't, because most alien invasion stories, again, aside from the ones that are the opposite, like Independence Day, most alien invasion movies, the aliens are just so far advanced that it seems utterly hopeless. Whereas in this universe, it seems like it's an actual war, and that that we're actually they're still formidable, clearly, but we've got some means of actually standing a chance, which I like, because it's something that you don't see very often.
Yeah, I mean, these aliens had to be taken down by Michelle, who doesn't have access to much in the way of resources.
Yeah, this is somebody who killed a giant monster using one Molotov cocktail. That is what the climactic scene in this movie is.
Yeah, so I mean, these aliens have one giant weakness that is easy to exploit, and the movie isn't like even trying to point or to present it as, well, Michelle has somehow lucked into figuring out what that weakness is. I don't know if we can feel safe for Michelle in her new career as an alien fighter. Not an alien who is a fighter, but a fighter of aliens. But we can be safe knowing that the campaign that she's on now has a high probability of success.
Yeah, which is cool. That's a cool way to end this kind of movie. And again, it's sort of that weakness portrayed in the aliens, I think, is something that makes this even more of a spiritual cousin to the early M. Night Shyamalan movies, because it's very much reminiscent of Signs, which we mentioned in our Get Out episode. That's a movie I'm a big fan of. Another movie that lots of people bag on, but I always really liked it. And yeah, those first 3 movies of his, Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and Signs, are movies that I've always been a really big fan of, and it always made me sad that Shyamalan changed directions, not just in that he changed directions to being a crappy director, but that I thought that those movies were so tonally unique. And this movie, I feel like, really captured a lot of what makes those 3 movies work so well for me. That has kind of a similar tonal balance, kind of a similar sense of humor, a similar approach to genre. It does have a twist, and so that's a really high compliment coming from me, because I love those 3 movies, and this movie I felt really stood up in comparison to those.
All right, do you have any other final thoughts about 10 Cloverfield Lane?
I think I've pretty much said my piece about it. It's a great movie. Watch it, and again, I only anticipate this franchise getting better.
The sky is the limit. Actually, no, beyond the sky is the limit. because the next part of the franchise is going to be in outer space.
Speaking of Independence Day.
Well, we went from beneath the sea to under the ground to outer space.
Yes. I was trying to think of a witty comeback to that, and I got nothing. I'm sorry, I'm a bad sidekick.
I'm just going to dock your pay. All right, let's get to our final segment, Best Death. So, out of the 2 deaths in this movie, well, actually, no, we're going to throw an exploding spaceship since it's alive-ish. Out of those 3 deaths, who had the best death?
I guess Emmett, just because that's such a unique scene. I thought it was really powerful and really brutal and really effective. Although, again, Howard gets points for definitely dying, even though we know neither the cause of death nor even see it happen. But he's definitely dead, which is not something that I've seen in a lot of movies either. So, these are all very unique deaths. These are not ways in which death by really, really sudden and jarring tonal shift, death by either acid or fire or explosion, and death by Molotov cocktail / explosion of self. Those are not modes of death that I think we have covered before on this podcast.
No. I, too, will go with Emmett's death. I think it is... it's so sad because I really, really liked Emmett.
Yeah, Emmett's a really good character. Yeah, this movie is an amazing example of what you can do with a really small cast if you make every character really, really well written, and get some great actors to portray them. That's the thing. Well, and that's the weird thing about this movie is that it is so kind of small in its scale, but there's A-list talent all over it. It's J.J. Abrams. They've got John Goodman. They've got Mary Elizabeth Winstead. The voice of I looked this up while we were talking. The voice of her boyfriend in the first scene in the movie is Bradley Cooper. So just they've got, who really, really makes that scene work. So they really just took this very sort of small scale setup and just threw everything they had into every aspect of it. And it really paid off in a wonderful movie, which is always really nice to see. I always think better to be focused and to focus on making every aspect of what you're doing great than, to be sort of big and bloated and overambitious and really uneven the way that a lot of big blockbusters are.
Yeah, I mean, this is the lowest budgeted out of all the Cloverfield movies. Cloverfield 10 years before it was at 25 million. The Cloverfield Paradox is at 45 million. This is only 15 million. 15 million is not much in the way of making a movie.
Yeah, not these days.
Yeah, that is maybe only slightly more than like a Blump movie might drop on something. Blump's usually in the 4 or 5 million range, but they've gone up to 10 for big franchise movies. So this is a lesson in that you really, really don't need tons of money. You just need strong writing and strong actors.
Absolutely. Yeah. This movie cost a 100th of some of the Transformers movies, and it is just so infinitely better in every regard.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to us talk about 10 Cloverfield Lane, and I hope you are all very, very excited for our legendary Cloverfield Paradox podcast coming up.
I would catch it if I were you. I'm anticipating great things.
We are very, very excited for Cloverfield Paradox.
Yeah, again, if I didn't mention it earlier to our listeners, I have not seen it yet because I hadn't seen this movie before, so I wanted to watch that first. But I have heard things, and I'm eager to see what those things may be referring to with my own eyes and to talk about them.
Yeah, I have seen it. Oh, and I forgot to ask you, what did you think this movie was going to be before you actually sat down and watched it and discovered that it had nothing to do with the original Cloverfield?
Well, I'd heard that just in sort of the general reception of it a couple of years ago when it came out, so I wasn't anticipating it to be a direct sequel at all. But yeah, I wasn't prepared for exactly how independent the vast majority of it was, and then for the swerve that it takes at the end. I didn't know really at all how it was gonna go about being as indirect, but at the same time still very real sort of successor to that movie. So I knew sort of that was what it was going to be, but I didn't know at all how it was going to do it.
So thank you for tuning in. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
So long.